an ERP implementation failure case study out of the UK, why digital transformation is dead, and using ChatGPT to evaluate and select ERP software. Those are just a few of the topics we're going to cover today in episode number 123 of Transformation Ground Control.
This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling, CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. I'm your host today, and with me, as always, is Cheatham. Kyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited for today's episode.
Excited to have you here, too. And I shouldn't say as always, because you had a holiday a little while ago and also an injury, a medical situation. So it's good to have you back after a couple episodes of not having you on the show. So welcome back to the show. It's never quite the same when I have to do the solo. So thank you for being here.
Oh yeah, no, it's. I'm happy to be back and missed all of the live action. So excited to bring a jam-packed episode today.
Absolutely. And this is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of change. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday, streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as on audio podcast platforms throughout the world. So thank you for being here today. Got a great show for you, action-packed, as Kyler said. We're going to start off the opening segment with some questions from the audience on social media or via social media. We'll pull some of those questions and answer those questions with you. And we also have some hot topics we'll cover, a couple of case studies, a success and a failure we're going to cover. We're going to talk about a digital transformation success story out of Canada, and then we're going to talk about an ERP failure case study out of the UK. So we'll get to that in the opening segment here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we are going to have our first guest, Drake Coker, who is the CEO of Nashville Record Pressing. That is a client of Third Stage Consulting's, and we're helping him through a digital transformation journey right now as we speak. He just completed, or their organization just completed an ERP implementation, and now we're moving into the next phases of their transformation. And so we're going to talk with Drake in real time as he's going through this transformation to talk about why digital transformation is dead. And that's a controversial topic, I know, and a controversial thread, but we want to talk about the things that make the tech-focused digital transformations obsolete and why it's all the other stuff that is more important than technology. And digital transformation as we know it is dead, and that's what we're going to talk about here later in the show with him. And then later in the show, Kyler, you had a chance to sit down with Greg Bennett, who is our chief strategy officer here at Third Stage, and you guys ran a test of a ChatGPT software selection. So you filmed the actual sort of in real time, this mock software selection process. And so we're going to unpack the good, the bad, the ugly of how that went for you guys. And that's going to be super interesting because, hey, why not use ChatGPT to select your next ERP system? If you instead of using Google or relying on intuition, why not try ChatGPT? We'll see how that went. And it sounds like you guys had some mixed results. So we'll get to that later in the show. So I guess to start, though, what are some of these questions you've got for us, Kyler?
Absolutely. Well, if you're new here, I do have what we fondly refer to as Eric's question jar. So you can pop questions or comments on any of his social media platforms or Third Stage. Also, this episode's very interactive, so go ahead and pop the questions in the chat wherever you're joining from today, and we will get to those in the next couple of weeks. The jar's full in my absence here, so we'll have to get through
lots of accumulation.
I know, right?
Lots of demand for questions. Lots of questions brewing.
Oh, this is a good one. This is a comment that I'd love your reaction to. It's a little spicy, so just brace yourself. So this is from your TikTok videos about customization versus vanilla software. So software is made how it's made. It's a product. It's your job to sell the product, figure out your job. And of course, your job is not to sell the product, but I think that this is a really interesting perspective from vendors that have to sell the product to a customer, and that's their overall job. So I wondered if you could give us kind of your reaction to what you would say to that user in response, which I think you should do another TikTok video on this one too, because that's kind of funny. So
Like a response to it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. I mean, it's funny on TikTok. We've talked in this podcast before about how TikTok, compared to other social media channels, is a bit more. It's a tough crowd. It's a tougher crowd, in my opinion. They aren't as forgiving on anything that they don't agree with, and or they make assumptions around what your intentions are. And it's really interesting because one of the most common criticisms that I get on TikTok, in particular, is that, well, you must be selling something, and that's why you have this opinion. And it's like, no, I don't sell anything. I sell my services, which is independent tech agnostic consulting services, and my team services, but I'm not trying to sell anyone software for sure. It's the last thing I'm trying to do. It's just sell software. It's the last thing I'd want to do, quite frankly. But you get that a lot on TikTok where, no offense to the many salespeople that I know listen to the show. A lot of software vendors and sales reps listen to the show. I appreciate you. You have a key role in this industry. I hope you like what you do, but I would not be good at it, and I wouldn't enjoy selling software. That's just me, though. But I would say that it's interesting, though, and I try not to take it personally, in that there's an assumption, because the industry is so wired that way. Consultants are selling stuff. Most consultants are selling stuff. Most of them are somehow affiliated with the software vendor and trying to sell a certain type of product. So I get why people assume that I must be trying to sell something, because that's what everyone else does. But if you don't know me or you don't know third stage, you're going to make that assumption, and it just happens that that's not a correct assumption. So I don't take it personally. I think it's just a reflection of the industry and the flaws in the industry, for sure.
Absolutely. And if we do have any of our vendor partners or colleagues watching, definitely post your response in the comments too, because we'd love to hear what you think as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know why I stick these together, because it's always very hard to. This is a question from one of your users on YouTube. How do you deal with the massive amount of data from sensors? Tech is supposed to decrease workload, but now there is so much data to navigate.
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember seeing that question recently. And it's, I think the key is if you don't have the right tool sets, you're going to feel the pain of the volumes of data. But if you've got the right tool sets, you obviously need that technology to be able to absorb and make sense of all that data. So that's the beauty of artificial intelligence and automation and machine learning, robotic process automation, all that stuff. It's providing tool sets and capabilities that allow you to process mass amounts of data in a way that is humanly impossible, or at the very least, it would take forever to do. So you have to have the right technological tool sets to do it. But once you have the tools in place that can consolidate that data and help you get insights out of it, whether it's through business intelligence tools or predictive analytics or AI and machine learning tools, whatever tool set it is, once you have those tool sets in place, then it's not quite so overwhelming. But the way most organizations are built right now is to manually try to make sense of all this stuff and rely on humans and human intervention to understand and make sense of all this data. And that's obviously a weakness and a flaw, and it's not scalable in the same way that technology can make it. So I think if you've got the right tool set, it won't be as overwhelming, would be my response.
Good. Yeah. Data governance, something that's really important in that phase 0 planning. This is a good one. Also from your YouTube channel, this is a little career advice. Good one to kind of wrap up our Q&A session with. I went to school for cybersecurity, but no one will hire me without 2 to 5 years experience. What would be your suggestion?
I think probably the biggest thing you can do if you've got that foundation of training, but you don't have the experience yet, is to do anything you can to get some sort of experience, even if it's a brief unpaid or low paid internship. I don't know if unpaid internships are still a thing, but if they are, it might be worth investing that time just to get the experience. Or better yet, if you can do it and get paid, even if it's part-time, even if it's just for a short period, anything that shows that you have some experience is going to be huge. Even if it's, say, 3 months, if you get 90 days of experience in a 90-day internship, that's huge. And that puts you well ahead of most candidates that don't have that experience. So that'd be the biggest thing I'd do. The other thing that you could do too is if you can find ways to demonstrate that you know what you're doing beyond having a degree on paper. So, for example, if you could create a presentation or a video or a blog or something about cybersecurity about a topic of interest to you, and you could use that as an asset that you could use or collateral you could use to get the attention of a hiring decision maker. That just demonstrates and separates and distinguishes you in a way that most candidates aren't going to do. So those are a couple ideas. Get some limited experience, whatever you can, even if it's an internship, unpaid, part-time, short-term, whatever, or create some content or some collateral that should demonstrate that you know this field. You may not be an expert yet, but you can at least start to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And connecting with some influencers that we've had on cybersecurity. If you go to our YouTube channel and just search cybersecurity, you can connect with those thought leaders as well as Eric, and kind of ask for that career advice. But that's great general advice too for anyone that's looking to kind of break into the workforce from that transition from school to a professional role as well. So
yeah.
All good stuff here. So I know we have some additional questions in the jar here that we'll get to next week as well. And then also, if you have questions for Eric, you can go ahead and just pop them in the chat. And I always go through here and either answer them or we pull them for another episode. But I know we're excited to get into some of our hot topics today, too, in those case studies.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to get into a couple digital transformation case studies. One is a success and one is a failure. One is a success story out of Canada and one is a failure story out of the UK. Not that the geography really has anything to do with it, but just to give you a sense of where these case studies were based. We're trying to look at this topic here globally, so we'll get to those two case studies here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll have Drake Coker, the CEO of Nashville Record Pressing, on the show. And he's going to be on with me chatting about why digital transformation is dead and why it never existed in the first place. And really challenge us to rethink how we think about digital transformation. And then later in our last segment, we'll have you, Kyler, and Greg Benton from the Third Stage team doing a little test of ChatGPT to help with the software selection process. And we'll see how that turns out for you guys, or how it turned out for you guys in your recent experiment that you guys did. So stick around for that. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say to me. I've been waiting for so long to hear.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name's Eric Kimberling from Third Stage Consulting, here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. And this podcast is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of transformation. So you've got a couple hot topics, a couple case studies for us to unpack here, Kyler. What have you got in store for us?
Well, do you want the good news first or the bad news first?
Let's start with the bad news. Just get
Bad
that out
news?
of the way. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of PR around a pretty significant Oracle failure. So the case study here is actually Birmingham City Council. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, it is Europe's biggest city council. And what they are looking at is 100 million euros, which is about 123 million American dollars, is its expense for its Oracle ERP system failure. And it kind of talks about the council, which is the largest local authority by Europe population, accrues 4.2 billion in revenue annually, and it's been grappling to replace its SAP for core functions like HR and finance since 2018. So this has been going on for a very long time, 5 years. The project was reviewed in 2019, 2020, and then again in 21, with the total implementation cost of the project at for $47 million. So right around like $50 million, and it's doubling in cost. So I want to read you kind of a quote from their spokesperson and get your reaction to this. So significant resources will be required to arrive at a position where the system can be fully implemented. We estimate the final cost will be in the region of 100 million to 125 million American dollars. So knowing that, they have gotten a lot of flack for replacing SAP, and the fact that SAP might not have been perfect, but it shouldn't have been pulled or replaced by Oracle ERP Cloud, or as they call it in here, Oracle Fusion. This has been a really high profile case for Oracle. Even Larry Ellison, who's their CTO, visited the Birmingham City Council and said that was one of their number one success wins to migrate a very large SAP ERP customer to Oracle Fusion. They also mentioned that they did this for West Sussex County Council, whose migration was also delayed. So I thought I might share kind of that failure case study with you, share some numbers about how it really impacted overall revenue and obviously taxpayer money as well, and see if I could get your reaction around what that actually looks like from just an overall impact scope.
Yeah, well, one thing you said to me that really jumped off the page were a couple things. One is the price tag, obviously being over 100 million US dollars in an implementation is high. For most organizations, that's just not even fathomable. Although I will say we've seen projects projects that have failed that are even bigger. I think the biggest one I've seen is 1.2 or 1.3 billion was spent by a really large organization in a failure in a lawsuit, and I had to testify in that case. Because of $1 billion plus failure, you can imagine there's a lot of money at stake in legal action. So I have seen bigger failures and bigger price tags than 100 to 125 million, but that's for most organizations a huge number. But the other thing that jumped off, in addition to the high price tag, is the fact that you said they're going from SAP to Oracle. Is that right?
Yes.
So they're ripping out SAP, going to Oracle. That's
Yes.
a big deal. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that or it can't be done, but anytime so there's two types of clients we work with. We have the ones that are like mid-sized growing companies that are sort of like growing into newer systems, and they are replacing like an old system that doesn't scale anymore. Then they're replacing it with a bigger, better system that is still painful, but it sort of makes sense because they're trying to grow up as a company. But when you have a huge government entity or a huge, say, Fortune 500 for-profit company like Coca-Cola or any big company, brand name recognized huge company, anytime they go from like one platform like an SAP or an Oracle or Microsoft, and they've invested all these years of competencies in building those companies to support that system, you rip that system out for better or for worse and replace it with something else. That's a really painful process, even more so than if you're trying to go through an upgrade or if you're just trying to replace a system you've outgrown. Because now you're talking about having to upskill people and retrain and reskill and really transform your entire IT department to support that new system that you might be deploying. And for a big company, there's just a lot of complexity that goes along with that. So those are a couple of things that jump off the page, but I guess I have more questions than answers or reactions on this. Do you know, have they said like why? Do they have any read on why it got out of hand like this?
So what they did is they did reach out to Oracle. This is a Microsoft article, which we should also just put out there because they're obviously having a heyday with this. But they didn't comment on why that was such an issue. But I will say that one thing about this article is there's a quote unquote whistleblower, an insider from in the organization that is quoted here. and they talk about how standard SAP is the same, but BCC customized SAP to really get it working well is working for the organization, except for some minor annoyances. SAP was a good product that should have never been ditched. So that's just a little piece to your point about what that looks like. And we know with any failure, there's blame on both sides, but it is a pretty significant impact financially, obviously, talking about going from those large complex systems and kind of flipping those customers. It doesn't sound like that's something that usually happens.
Yeah, and organizations like that have to look at what they have to gain. What are you really going to gain by, in a best case scenario, you replace SAP with Oracle? Let's just say, for hypothetical purposes, that Oracle in this case for this particular client is, say, 20% better than SAP. You look at all their requirements and Oracle can handle it, like, say, 20% better. You have to look at that and say, is that really worth the risk? I mean, maybe you'd be better off just sticking with the system you have, upgrading it, getting more value out of it, tweaking it, fine-tuning it, spending less money, but getting more value out of it. And yes, maybe it's not the best system for you, but at least you've mitigated the risk and the cost that goes along with ripping out a system and putting in a new one. And too many organizations get sucked into the sales message that, Oracle's better, or SAP's better, Microsoft's so much better. These systems aren't that much different, really. I mean, there's nuances and there's, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, but at the end of the day, you're not going to succeed or fail because you did or didn't choose one product over another. It's going to be because you implemented it well or you didn't. So anyway, there's some things to think about too.
Yeah, definitely. A very interesting high profile case study. Whenever you have Larry Ellison actually involved in mentioning it, it's obviously something that was very, very high profile. So if you need any help, City Council, we know people that are huge experts in that remediation of failure implementations. So shameless plug there. And we do have a UK office. So you just let us know if you need any help.
Absolutely. And Larry Ellison, I know you're listening because I'm sure you listen to this podcast religiously, but you're more than welcome to join us on the show to chat about that topic or other topics of your choice. So,
absolutely. Well, let's go to the good news. So recently, Scotiabank is a banking entity in Canada, and it was awarded the 2023 Digital Transformation Award in the large private sector category. And these awards are given by IT World Canada. And what their digital transformation went through was focused on a customer-centric business approach, which I know you've had a few guests on previous episodes to talk about the importance of that, especially when leveraging new technology. So they developed an AI-powered customer chat box, and I just want to kind of share some of their findings when they actually implemented this into their organization. So it was a multi-year digital transformation, and the chatbot has successfully managed over 2 million messages from 300,000 unique users since the launch in 2022. And what they continue to do is learn from the data and responses, and the chatbot currently is responding with over 70% accuracy, providing speed and efficiency for customers, and an overall improved experiment. And what I thought was really interesting is they have a quote in here from their global SVP that says, with nearly 40% of customer questions via chat being answered by Scotiabank's chat box and hundreds of thousands of calls diverted from the contact center, the bank has increased capacity for our teams to provide trusted advice to customers while providing them with more options to interact with us. So that's some key metrics over there about accuracy, and then just how they created some efficiencies, not only internally, but also prioritizing that customer-centric approach for their user base and overall banking community. So interesting case study there. What's your reaction to this more happy news?
Well, it makes you wonder. I mean, it's such a stark contrast, these two case studies that you mentioned. It makes you wonder, though, if maybe, and this is a total speculation, hypothesis, but based on what you said, makes you wonder if maybe the first example of failure of the UK government entity if they were too focused on themselves and sort of back office stuff and technology and not focused enough on the end game, like what are we really trying to get out of this project? Whereas with the entity in Canada, it sounds like, the success story, it sounds like they were focused more on the customer experience and how do we make things easier for our customers. And not that that's going to solve all your problems, but sometimes when you have a clearer vision of what you want the project to be and what the benefits are and how it's going to transform your business, a lot of times those projects just tend to go better because you're all focused on the same thing and you all have the same end state in mind. So that's the biggest question I have. I don't know if I'm right or not, but that is something that a lot of organizations struggle with, is to have that clarity of whether it's customer experience or increasing employee morale, or of course, increasing profitability, increasing revenue. You've got to have like clear metrics aligned to whatever digital transformation you're going through so that you can stay on track with that project.
Absolutely. I mean, that's well said in summary. And I turn to our audience to have some feedback around a customer-centric approach. Is that absolutely pivotal that you prioritize your customers, or are internal operations more important? And you can say it depends, as long as you hashtag it depends, because we're making shirts that say that. So, but yeah, definitely interested to hear the community's feedback on those two kind of polarizing examples.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you do say it depends, we get royalty rights to it or something because we say it all the time. So we have to monetize this podcast somehow, right? Uh, so good. Well, those are really interesting case studies, and it's always fun to chat about real life examples like that. So thank you for sharing those. And be curious to hear the audience's feedback as well. And speaking of real life case studies, we're going to continue the case study thread here by bringing on one of our clients from Third Stage Consulting. After a break, we're going to bring on Drake Coker, who is the CEO of a company called Nashville Record Pressing, and they make vinyl records, which is super cool because I love music and I love vintage stuff like vinyl, even though, as we're going to talk about here, vinyl is making a comeback, and vinyl is actually a pretty strong industry right now, despite all the newer technologies to disrupt the music business. But we're going to have Drake on to talk about why digital transformation is dead and how we should be rethinking digital transformations as a result. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Could you whisper in my ear the things you want to feel? I'll give you anything.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Anything you ever dreamed to be complete. Yes, I'm nothing that's
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as on audio podcast platforms throughout the world. And of course, this is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation every week. So thanks for being here. And we are excited for our next guest. Our next guest is Drake Coker, who is the CEO of a company called Nashville Record Pressing. It is a client of Third Stage Consulting's. It's a company we've been working with for some time now and continue to work with them through their transformation. And we wanted to have Drake on the show to talk about why digital transformation is dead and how we should be rethinking digital transformation. So with all that being said, Drake, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. And this is going to be an exciting conversation. You and I have had some interesting conversations leading up to this one about this particular topic, and I'm excited to unpack it and see what the audience thinks too, and get some of the input from the audience here. But before I do that, maybe tell us a little bit about you yourself, and also about Nashville Record Pressing and what you guys do.
Yeah. Okay. I've been at entrepreneurialism for a long time. So I've been involved in a number of companies early on, and then through sort of the duration of their life. and also have had a stint working for some very large companies as a consultant. So have seen a lot of things, and but I've always really been drawn to doing things that are physical, doing things that actually exist in the world, right? Um, and I had a vinyl record related startup in Los Angeles for about 7 years. And in the midst of that, got to know a number of the players in the industry. The biggest of which is a company based in the Czech Republic called GZ Media, which already has a couple of pressing plants here in North America, Precision Record Pressing in Toronto, as well as Memphis Record Pressing in Memphis, Tennessee. And about 2.5 years ago, they had a need to build a new plant in Nashville. They called me up and asked me if I would move to Nashville and build and run the new business for them. And I said yes. And so here we are.
Interesting. So, you've got that entrepreneurial background. You've obviously have the experience in the background in vinyl record production. But tell us about Nashville Record Pressing and what you guys do, and sort of what's the state of not the state of the market, but what's your role in the market? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, it's pretty cool. So with our parent in the Czech Republic, GZ, and our sister companies here in North America, Precision, and Memphis, we there's quite a bit of independence between the businesses, but we run a rather tightly organized and orchestrated group. The group's largest customers are the major record labels and other very large producers of vinyl records. And our customers over the last couple of years had been asking for more and more capacity. Vinyl record capacity globally had been rather constrained. There hadn't been much investment in the business, particularly in North America, since the early 70s. And it's not the easiest thing to do to bring new vinyl record pressing capacity online, because it's based around these very particular pieces of equipment called vinyl record presses, which are very difficult to get. No one was producing them. And our parent very intelligently started producing their own about 10 years ago. And so we sort of had a big jump in this upswing that we've seen in the market. And so it was clear that our customers not only needed more capacity, but they wanted that capacity located in Nashville. They specifically asked us to build a pressing plant here. The original concept, I think the original idea was very cool, but also fairly small, fairly humble. And then over the course of sort of digging into it a little bit, the need and the aspirations grew rather quickly. So I got involved in May of 2021. Moved to Nashville. I was the first year. I had boots in the ground on August 1. And at that point, it took us the rest of the year to sort of find and lease a building, get some building permits submitted, and get going. We had building permits in hand by January 15 of 2022. We had contractors in place on March 1 of 2022, and that's sort of when the project started in haste. At that point, we had a 100,000 square foot building, which was totally empty, just concrete and columns. And it's been a whirlwind since. So by June 22nd of 2022, we were making our first records. By October 17th, we made our 1 millionth record. December of last year, we made 1 million records alone. And and it basically grown from just a few people working with me to a team of over 200 running 5 days a week, 24 hours a day, producing 60,000 records in a 24-hour time period. And then this year, in the process of doubling that capacity again, while bringing an ERP system online, which is obviously how we got involved, and executing a number of additional, rather complex, multifaceted projects simultaneously to get the company where we want it to be in a very short period of time.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. So total startup mode to scale up mode to sort of just ramping up production. That's got to be an exciting journey in a pretty short period of time. Hearing you describe these volumes that you're already doing in a short period of time makes some wonder. I think there might be some listening right now that wonder, well, how could you possibly be making that many records? With all the digital media alternatives in the marketplace with Apple Music and Spotify and Amazon Music, why in the world would I buy records? Maybe tell us a little bit about the state of the industry, because it's making somewhat of a comeback here. It's cool again to buy vinyl and to have vinyl, but what is it about vinyl that's getting this resurgence, and what does the future hold, or what do you think the future market looks like for the vinyl industry?
Yeah, so our view on this is a bit different than others. Clearly we're seeing a tremendous resurgence in vinyl. We're about 10 years into it now, actually, something like that, maybe a little bit more. But it's picked up a lot of momentum in the last 4 or 5 years. People are sort of calling it the vinyl revival. But I think there's just a short bit of historical perspective is helpful. I think everyone has been rather surprised that vinyl records have sort of come back, right? And are asking the exact questions that you're asking. But the truth is, this is not the first time that vinyl's come back. It's the third time. It was challenged both by AM radio early in the 20th century, and then by stereo magnetic tape in the middle of the 20th century, and then again by CDs and the progression to peer sharing, and then iTunes and sort of digital downloads, and then streaming, right? So the truth is that historically speaking, vinyl is the only format, to survive the technologies that have succeeded it. And it's done it 3 times over 100 years. So we can, for another live stream around another topic, we can talk about why that is, but people just really like vinyl. And what's happening now is that a new generation is sort of rediscovering it. And it's funny, it's like they're rediscovering it for the first time, or rediscovering something that's really existed for a long time. So I think from our standpoint, when we went digital, I think everyone just assumed that digital music was going to be just a different delivery vehicle. It was just going to be a different distribution channel for the same product. But what I think in fact has happened is that it bifurcated the market. And digital is amazing. It's inexpensive. It's totally portable. You get everything. It becomes a very social experience if you're involved. It's easy to listen to what your friends are listening to, or what you're, seeing online or in a stream or something like that. But it's also very passive, right? It's in fact, what we see is that digital music consumption is a lot like consuming an IG feed, or a LinkedIn feed, or a Facebook feed, right? You just kind of fall through it and evolve over time. And that's great for a lot of people. And digital is terrific. I mean, it's doing things through the industry that were never before possible, which is rather exciting. And there is a not insignificant number of people who crave a much more active relationship with their music. And those people tend to want to be able to own their music. They love the physical experience, and that's really where vinyl shines.
Right.
And I think the proof is in what we've seen in sales. And and the official sales numbers are significantly understated. But right now we're at a place where across the group, we're producing well over 300,000 records a day, and on our way to 500,000. So it doesn't take much math to sort of figure out, what that looks like globally. There are lots of other players out there. We're certainly not the only game in town. We are a significant player, but there is an awful lot of people that are buying and collecting vinyl records.
Yeah. I think it's a fascinating industry. Partly, I love music, as you and I have discussed, and I, so much so that I named this company Third Stage Consulting after rock and roll and after a rock and roll album. But I love vinyl. I think there's something to be said for the physical experience, as you described, just the look and feel of the vinyl, the liner notes, the sound quality is so much better. And, digital might be an easier, it might be more convenient, but it doesn't sound as good. It's more compressed. It just doesn't have the depth and the warmth that a vinyl recording or a vinyl listening experience has. So I can see why people are gaining a renewed appreciation for vinyl. It's really interesting to hear your take on how the industry has survived multiple evolutions and competitive threats dating back to AM radio. That's fascinating. I'd never really thought of it from that perspective. So I have to ask you a question then, being that you're an entrepreneur, you're in this space, you're the CEO of a company that produces vinyl records. What are some of your favorite records or your favorite music in general, whether it's on vinyl or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people that are in the business say that they have rather eclectic tastes, and I actually do. So there's I'm a huge fan of a lot of the music that's coming out of the UK, particularly in the 80s and 90s. There's a lot of stuff that we would call rock and roll that I'm really into. I was in Los Angeles for 20 years. I got very connected to the indie music scene there. There's a lot of stuff. I was in college when grunge was unfolding. So it just kind of I had parents that and a grandfather that listened to a lot of jazz and classical. But it kind of I mean, it changes day to day what I'm listening to. But what's cool, I think, is the relationship that that I have with the music that I love. And it's funny, that's where kind of the records are the coolest, because oftentimes I listen to a record and it reminds me of the person that turned me on to the record, or occasions where I used to listen to that record, or how many times I've moved that record from one house to another, or one city to another, or where it came from. And that's, to me, I think the piece that keeps me plugged in. Like it's got a lot of hooks in me, and there isn't as much of that. In my experience, that's harder and harder to find these days. So it's
right.
It's a pretty cool thing.
That's very cool. And it's cool to be able to lead a company that fits your passion too, and your love of music and the entrepreneurial spirit that you have as well. We're here chatting with Drake Coker about why digital transformation is dead and how we need to rethink digital transformations. We're going to continue the conversation when we come back from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. Thank you for being here today. And we are in the midst of a conversation here with Drake Coker from Nashville Record Pressing, talking about why digital transformation is dead and how we need to rethink our digital transformations. Let's jump back into the conversation. Well, very cool. So let's talk about this topic here that I think this was your idea, actually. The words digital transformation is dead, I think is your idea. And I love it because it's controversial. I think it makes you wonder, well, what in the world do you mean digital transformation is dead? And that's what we're going to get into. But I also like it too, because it's sort of a riff on the rock and roll, rock is dead quote from the Doors or the Who, insert rock band that quoted that phrase here. Long live rock, rock is dead, long live rock, that whole controversy that's been going on for decades sort of fits in here at digital transformation. Is digital transformation dead? I'd be curious to hear from the audience. Do you think digital transformation is dead? Do you think the way we've been doing it is sustainable? Is it the right way? Is there something else that's on the horizon? I'd love to hear kind of the audience feedback here. And before I ask you maybe to describe what you think around this whole thread of digital transformation being dead, Drake. I want to turn to the audience real quick and just recognize where some of the people are joining from today. We have people joining from all over the world, as I mentioned earlier. Los Angeles, your old stomping ground, Drake. We have someone from Los Angeles, Denver, Colorado, Pakistan, India, Denver, Colorado again, UK, Vietnam, Naperville, Illinois, Ethiopia, India, Egypt, Doha, Dubai, Dallas, Texas. A lot of global participation here today. So thank you, everyone, for joining and being part of this digital transformation community here today. And if you have any questions for Drake as we get going here, I'd love to hear your comments. And I'd also love to hear comments about, is digital transformation dead? And for that matter, is rock dead? You know, is vinyl dead? I don't know. There's a lot of questions we have here, a lot of unanswered questions. But maybe just to get started on this whole thread, then, Drake, your vision for Nashville Record Pressing is to be more than a record pressing company. Tell us a little bit about the longer term vision of the company, and what is it you're trying to build? And you and I have talked a bit about this in, our client related work, our client and consulting relationship. But tell us a little bit about the vision of the company and what is it you're trying to do and what is it you're trying to build?
Yeah, so let me see if I can do this rather briefly. Frankly, the goal for NRP is to be the best record pressing plant in the world, and perhaps the best record pressing plant that's ever existed in the world. Inside of this group that we're very fortunate to be part of, and in service of the group's success. Part of this is about this unusual set of sort of causes and conditions that existed around how this company has been created and how we've been able to grow it. And then part of it's about sort of what's going on specifically around vinyl and in the world. And then some of it's also about sort of what's going on in the world in terms of technology and even digital transformation. And so putting those things very quickly together, we are absolutely a startup, but we are a startup that has been unbelievably blessed from the beginning with capital support. We're in a situation where we have literally years of runway in front of us, where every record that we produce is already pre-sold and wrapped up inside of capacity agreements that we have across the group with our larger customer. We have all kinds of operational and technological support. We have access to vinyl record presses, which is a very rare thing. And so we've had this confluence of events where, yes, we're starting this thing from scratch, and obviously everything that we do has to be built, but we get to literally stand on the shoulders of our group and sort of everything that's come before. So it's like we're getting catapulted forward, and it's really, I think, our obligation to take tremendous advantage of those resources and momentum, and to try to maintain our vision and our balance and make the most out of it, just to leapfrog as far into the future as we can. Right? That's sort of what's going on with us. What's going on inside of music and vinyl is that there's a tremendous amount of love for it. This revival has been demand driven. It's been pulled by the marketplace, right? And the industry really got out of the business of making records, and making records is hard. It's complicated. It's hard. It has quite a bit more engineering and technicality in it than I think most people recognize, and a lot of art, right? And so being able to, it's difficult to bring records to market, and it's difficult particularly to bring more and more titles to market. So a second piece of this vision is how we can not only be really just good at the basic functions, but how we as a company and as a group can provide more and more services to our customers to help get more and more titles into the marketplace, and provide access to the people that love and buy and collect vinyl to a much broader swath of the catalog, and in so doing, hopefully continue to reignite and refuel their love for vinyl, and then continue to drive the market forward as a whole. But the third piece of this is just we're living in an incredibly transformational time in my view, and I think that it challenges me personally and professionally, and it challenges an awful lot of people that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, to really accurately gauge how much change is in the works right now broadly. And I think that if you can look it squarely in the face, there's an opportunity and probably in my situation, a responsibility to ask some big questions, which is not only how far can we go, but more importantly, in what direction do we want to go? And what are we actually trying to create, right? And how can technology and this change be a tool that helps bring more intentionality and I would say human-centered vision to what we're building, rather than just trying to like hang on for dear life and see where we end up, right? And so you put those three things together. Some of that's very tactical, some of it's very strategic, some of it's very sort of like long term. But it's a combination of those, and a confluence of those particular conditions and situations that we're using to shape and drive the vision around what we're doing with NRP.
Very cool. Yeah, it's exciting to think about, and it's a pretty innovative way to think about building a company, and especially in an industry that's as fast changing as vinyl. Because in some ways, vinyl, the technology or the product hasn't changed a ton, at least the way I see it. I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem like the product itself has changed that much over decades. But the industry has gone through a tremendous amount of change, as you mentioned, the beginning with AM radio and peer sharing and CDs and digital delivery of music. Just a lot of disruption to the industry in general. How do you see digital transformation? I mean, use that term pretty loosely, but the term digital transformation, how do you see that concept enabling the vision that you just described in those three different pillars of your strategy?
Well, I think if for us, what we're trying to do is stay very involved with what's going on day to day and inside our business. And I said, we've just launched a new ERP system. It was something that we wanted from the beginning. Our parent has been running an ERP system for about 18 years. They have highly customized it and augmented to it over time, right? And so what we're getting is a rather well vetted implementation that's taken quite a bit of work to retool for what we're doing here in Nashville, which in terms of the nuts and bolts of the business is fairly different than what's happening with our parent in the Czech Republic, right? And so we're in this. We're discovering the system. We're learning what it does. We're learning what it doesn't do. We're learning what we like and what we don't like. And this is a very like in the weeds, moment to moment, day to day activity, right? But it would be easy for us to just sort of stay on that path, become more and more connected to that ERP system, upgrade it to kind of the current version that is out there, and figure out how to pull in all these changes that have been made, and just kind of ride that train, just sort of ride that train without much thought, right? And so the question that we've been asking is like, wait a second, where is this train actually leading, right? And how does this train compare to the other trains, planes, and automobiles that are available to us, particularly in a time when technology is changing in such a fundamental way, right? And how do we extract as much advantage and as much benefit and as much value as we can out of what we've got, right? But how do we create a real vision about where we want to go, which I think is about, at least really practically, is creating a bit of distance from what we are managing day to day, and really, this is kind of a terrible analogy, but trying to work from a clean sheet of paper as much as possible and say, okay, what do we want this company to be? What do we want this company to be in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years? What role do we want it to play? What role do we want it to play to our customers? What role do we want it to play to our community? What role do we want it to play to vinyl, right? And music? And really, what role do we want it to play in the lives of the people that are investing really their lives in helping to build it, right? And for me, I think what's been amazing about this experience is sort of is how these things have come together to create the opportunities that we're facing. We're very, very fortunate as a company. These things just don't always come together. And, we are never going to be a company that employs 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 people. We're not going to be a company that, is trading on 4 continents. There's going to be some limits. So I think that there's this sense like, okay, how do we grow this thing, and how do we grow it into something that's really a powerful source of support for all the people that we're connected to, right? And what does that really look like? And then working backwards from there. And I mean this even in specific ways, like saying, okay, in 5 years from now, we expect to be seeing X amount of revenue run through this company, and we would like to run this company with a leadership team of this size. And we would like the roles of the leadership team in terms of responsibility and content, but also balance to look like this. How do we then put the technology underneath it to be able to actually bring that reality to life, right? So that we get something that's designed around people that are taking care of it every day, rather than the other way around, right? And I think that's oftentimes where things break down. Where in my experience, it's easy to lose the forest for the trees.
Right. Yeah, and it's almost like, from hearing you describe it here today and in past conversations I've had with you, technology is just an enabler for sort of this bigger vision and this bigger strategy that you're trying to enable. And you talk a lot, hearing you talk now and in the past about this topic, you talk a lot about people and the people side of things and innovation and the culture you're trying to create. It's a lot of, I don't hear you getting into a lot of techno speak as we talk about digital transformation, which is why I find this conversation fascinating. And I think that's why you're so successfully focused on the right things in the world of digital transformation, and in particular, the ERP implementation that we just helped you with and that you just went through as a company, and some of the other digital initiatives you might do in the future as well. We're here chatting with Drake Coker about why digital transformation is dead and how we need to rethink digital transformations. We're going to continue the conversation when we come back from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
When things are big that should be small, who can tell what magic spells will be doing?
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation? Then you need our newly released 2023 Digital Transformation Report. This comprehensive report covers the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to ensure your digital transformation is optimized for success. The 2023 Digital Transformation Report is packed full of proven methodologies and insights from experts in the independent digital transformation field. You'll also receive practical insights on how to implement digital transformation strategies within your unique organization. This free report is available for download on our website at thirdstage-consulting.com under our Thought Leadership section.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. Thank you for being here today. And we are in the midst of a conversation here with Drake Coker from Nashville Record Pressing, talking about why digital transformation is dead and how we need to rethink our digital transformations. Let's jump back into the conversation. There's a couple interesting comments here from the audience I want to get to before we get too far into this. So one comment here is from Kyler on LinkedIn, who says digital transformation is not dead. It's just often misunderstood. And I think that might be kind of where you're going. You didn't use those exact words, but the way you describe digital transformation is different than a technology initiative. And too often, I think organizations think of digital transformation as a technology initiative. And the word digital is a little misleading because it's really not about the digital piece of it. It's about the transformation, which is the people and process side of things as well. There's an interesting comment related to the music industry and vinyl and delivery mechanisms for music. We certainly haven't seen a resurgence of cassette tapes. Is that true? I mean, I don't think cassette tapes have really had the same appeal as vinyl. There's something about vinyl that stands the test of time in the different iterations it's been through, as you described.
Yeah, cassettes have made a little comeback, but it's a very cottagey thing. It's very local, kind of alive in a few music scenes across the country. But I don't. I mean, obviously, I say this tongue in cheek, but like, if you compare vinyl to CDs, and you sort of say what's going on. I mean, at the end of the day, we'll see what happens. But CDs are office supplies, and vinyl is art. And cassette tapes were something that we used to put in answering machines. It's not. It's just the form matters because our relationship to the product matters. And by the way, I think that's something that, in terms of like, digital transportation not being dead, just misunderstood. I totally agree with that. I mean, I think that the reality is that, in my experience, it's how I relate to things, and how the teams I lead relate to things, and how, as an organization, that we relate to things, that gives those things either appropriate or inappropriate power in our day-to-day life trying to run the business, right? So digital transformation is really what we make it. But I think it takes it's not something that can live on its own. That we approach it a particular way. We build teams to try to bring it to life. Those teams have a point of view. They have a perspective. They certainly have bias because of what they've done in the past, in terms of how to drive this thing. And then oftentimes, if you're not intentional about where you're going and how you want to relate to something, then you get an unintentional relationship to it, which oftentimes leads to unintentional consequences. I think it's amazing that we're living in a time where there's never been more opportunity or possibility in terms of what technology can do for us, or more risk. And most people, most of the time, are really disconnected from sort of that truth, and sort of how broad that spectrum is, and making choices about how to sort of think about and interrelate with what's going on. I mean, it's highly likely. I have two young girls, but it's not that far in the future when they're going to be thinking about driving. And the way that we're going now, I think that there's certainly a better than 0% chance that there'll be no need for them to have driver's license, because autonomous vehicles will be available to hail on any smartphone in very cost effective and reasonable ways, right? That's a little nuts to think that this is not 20 or 30 or 40 years away. You could argue about how far away it is, but it's not 20 years away,
right? Yeah, we're seeing the early signs of it with Tesla and other pioneers in the space, for sure. Some other comments here. This is from Cyber Veteran on YouTube. Says digital transformation is going through a cooling off period. So it's not dead, it's cooling off. I think that's an interesting take on it. And then this is from Will on LinkedIn. Will says digital transformation is not dead. Most are not experts on the topic and struggle to form a plan, then execute it properly. It's like AI, or artificial intelligence. Many are intrigued and wish to use it, but few know how to get it started. So I think that's an interesting point. There's a lot of interest in digital transformation. A lot of organizations want to do it, but there's sort of a lack of expertise and experience of having been through a modern transformation like that. And then here's I never thought we'd do a digital transformation live stream and get into social distortion, but it's happening. It's happening as we speak here. Clay on LinkedIn says Mike Ness talks about going back to wire guitar versus wireless, and Mike Ness is the guitar player for a band called Social Distortion. Speaking of, they're from the UK, aren't they? Are they a UK band? But I just assume because they're punk, they must be. But anyway, he talks about going back to wire guitar versus wireless in the pursuit of tone, specifically saying why take the tone and run it through an iPhone, then to a speaker. So I think there's a lot of musical purists out there. They're sort of supporting this vinyl movement and the purity of the sound of vinyl. And so I think it makes for an interesting future for sure. But I wanted to maybe get to a question here of, how do you, if digital transformation is dead, which there's some controversy over whether or not it is. I mean, some are saying it's not dead, it's misunderstood, it's just cooling off. We don't know how to do it right. There's a lot of different reasons or justifications for why it may not be dead, but there's something wrong with digital transformation as we know it. So if it's dead, then how is this initiative that you're going through at NRP, how is that different from traditional digital transformation? So how would you contrast what you guys are doing with what other organizations might tend to do with their digital initiatives?
Yeah. So as I'd mentioned before, our situation is rather unique, right? And there's obviously some comments that have been made, I think very appropriately, that, each organization and each situation is unique. And I don't think that that's to be underestimated. We are, as this company is growing, it's certainly been a lot to manage, right? The pace of things. But we also got to start with a blank slate, right? So we're not in a situation where, we are 20 or 40 or 80 years old, and have, facilities spread out across 8 states and are invested in an ERP system, or other systems, where we're trying to either upgrade and reinvent and shift what we have, or bring something new online, right? And so I'm clear that we work rather hard. I certainly work rather hard to try to keep us very intentionally minded, very, very focused on what we're doing. But we're also unbelievably fortunate that we're in the situation where we're able to do that, right? Because clearly tearing things completely out, that have become sort of a digital backbone of an organization, even if they're largely unaffected, even if they can be rather ineffective in lots of ways, is a very, very difficult process, right? I'm not underestimating that. But I think about Los Angeles, right? Just Implmetation is a good example. So most people don't know that early in the last century, Los Angeles had the most sophisticated subway system in the world. It was called the Red Car. And there was both above ground and a subterranean rail. And basically the guy who is largely responsible for having Los Angeles end up being laid out the way it was laid out was had been in railroad for a long time and moved to Los Angeles when there were only 100,000 people between Tijuana and Valencia, and predicted that in 10 years there'd be 1 million people living there, and everybody thought he was crazy. And he bought up all these very small little railways that were in these little towns, and then figured out how to connect them. And those connections and rail arterials became the arterials around which Los Angeles really grew up. So they actually tore the Red Car out of Los Angeles. It doesn't exist anymore. And when they did, they fundamentally changed the way the city functions. And it's largely shaped the way that, a lot of the things that you hear about Los Angeles now in terms of traffic and being multimodal and multicentric and kind of just the way the city works, right? Like it changed the city forever. But there was one intention to begin with, right? Which is we're going to build the city around the Red Car. And there was the strength, the vision to persist in that path long enough that it actually largely started to unfold. And then there was a shift in direction. It really, it had a tremendous impact on what was left, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the trick about this is how to be really clear about what matters the most in the future today. And that's very hard. It's a very, very hard thing to do. But looking at some of the comments, I don't think it's a question about taking those of you who have spent a long time becoming experts at this, right? Digital transformation, and really having like this tremendous toolbox, and sort of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think the question is, how do we deploy this experience and these lessons and these toolboxes in a way to create something that is, for a particular organization or a particular situation, really transformational. And I think it requires, I guess what I'm advocating for, a combination of thinking. It's not something that we can do either unintentionally, and in my experience, it's also not something that we can do without having a number of different perspectives at the table, that are all really working together in a very, I would say, human way, or human focused way, to talk about what's possible and what's not, and then plot the path forward, instead of just coming in and evaluating the system and saying, okay, these are all the things that we don't like, and here's how we can improve it, and this is what we're going to do to, these are the tools and the upgrades and the changes we're going to apply to make the system better, and then everybody's going to be happy because we're going to have the same system, but it's going to function better.
Right. Yeah, it's rethinking how you define digital transformation, what your priorities are, and how you put all these pieces together. I think that's the challenge. And you talk about the city planning for Los Angeles and tying together all these railways. It's sort of like that. You've got to figure out how do you pull this all together in a way that makes sense and is cohesive and fits your strategy and enables that kind of growth that you're trying to accomplish as an organization.
Yeah, and I think that leaders have got to step up and say, okay, what do we want? And make some decisions and own those decisions, for better or worse, right? But to create some clarity around how this might work. I'm inside of sort of understanding sort of what we may or may not be going forward. One of the things that is clear to me and that we're committed to is not only being just as good as we can possibly be, being the best in the world, but also, we want to be the favorites of our customers, and we want to be an incredibly contributory citizen to Nashville, and take that really seriously. And for how many ever people we have that are on the team, whether it's 200 or 250 or 600 or whatever, right? We want these jobs to be the best jobs that people have ever had. Like, seriously, like, that they don't tell me that, but that they tell, strangers that, right? And that we think about how to build a company in a way to make that possible, right? But that's not necessarily the thought process that always happens.
We're here chatting with Drake Coker about why digital transformation is dead and how we need to rethink digital transformations. We're going to continue the conversation when we come back from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. Thank you for being here today. And we are in the midst of a conversation here with Drake Coker from Nashville Record Pressing, talking about why digital transformation is dead and how we need to rethink our digital transformations. Let's jump back into the conversation. Well, and speaking of your team, one thing I wanted to get to, because I think this is a relevant thing for a lot of people listening, but you have a pretty young and diverse team. I mean, from what I've seen, and I think part of it's just the entrepreneurial spirit of the company. You're in the music industry. It's a cool company. So I could see why you have a younger and perhaps a more diverse team than an average organization. But how does that impact how you approach this overall transformation and the direction you're going at NRP, or does it affect it?
Oh, absolutely. It's critical. I mean, we've worked really hard to build a team that we think is not just really capable, but a team that has a chance to be with the company for quite a long period of time, right? In my experience, it's rare to be able to have a large number of people that are working for a company have such a healthy relationship with the company that they're there for a long period of time, right? And I think that when that does happen, particularly if you do some things culturally, and if you do some things in terms of the way that you structure a leadership team and you encourage them and coach them to sort of manage their portfolio responsibilities, that you can end up with a highly dynamic, very capable group that also can have a lot of fun, like legitimately have a lot of fun at work, right? So we've been very intentional about this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about culture? When you think about culture within the company and the way it is now and what you think it needs to be in the future to navigate the future of this industry and where you're at in the industry, how does culture affect your transformation and how are you viewing culture at the moment?
Culture is everything. I mean, it literally is everything. I know a lot of people like to talk about culture. There's probably a lot of people that are sitting in my chair who, have read a bunch of books or whatever. I'm not depreciating that. It's a great way to get started, but I think it's hard. It's very difficult to be intentional about culture and then do the things that are necessary to try to foster it, right? To try to create causes and conditions where it can grow. Because culture is not something that can be intentionally constructed. It can be designed, but then it grows. It's a living thing, right? And you never get exactly what you think you're going to get, or what you thought you were going to get. That's been my experience. So I think the reality for us is that, this is a I don't know. This is a place where I feel like language and words really don't serve us very well. But there's a story about, what is culture, right? And I say culture is everything. And I think that a lot of people think about culture as being sort of the window dressing of life, right? Or the window dressing of an experience. And I would argue that it goes much deeper than that. And so there's this story about these two little fish that were swimming out to sea for the first time. And there's a much older fish that's coming back in from the ocean into the river, and he swims up to them. It's morning time, and he looks at the two fish and says, "Hey boys, how you doing?" They say good morning, and he smiles. And he says, "How's the water?" And he goes swimming on past. And the two little fish keep going out to sea, and one of them looks at the other one a few minutes later and says, "What's water?" Right? And that's culture. That it literally is everything. I think figuring out how to talk about culture, how to be able to plan and be intentional about culture as well as all these other things that we're talking about, and then actually be able to practically make decisions and changes and structures that help support the development of culture that seems very positive and full of potential. Like it's never been more important, and it's probably never been more difficult.
Right. And is that so? As you think about the transformation you guys are going through as a company, and as you evolve as a company, I assume then culture is something that's at top of mind for you. You said it's everything. So are you sort of deliberately defining what it is you want it to be and trying to mold it into something different than what it is now, or maybe help us understand how are you addressing that, or what are you doing with the culture of the company?
Well, really clearly. So to begin with, there's been a clear vision about, what kind of a culture we wanted. Right. And there's some words that are really clear. We want to be highly professional, which means capable, right? It doesn't mean dressing in a particular way. Like it means professional the way that you would think of an athlete as being professional. Somebody that can sink a shot from anywhere on the court against unbelievable odds and no time and against incredible pressure. Like it's about capability, right? There's an attitude too that if we stick together, we can do anything, right? Like it's no big deal. We've got this. There's an attitude that it's really important to be cool. And that incorporates a lot of things. Like it means being kind, being compassionate, it means taking yourself seriously, taking the people that you're working with seriously, taking the company seriously, being responsible, being involved, right? So we've tried to encapsulate it, and that's how we started. But the truth is that we've been growing so quickly, the day-to-day experience that most people have is rather turbulent. You and I have talked about this, because back to the third stage analogy and the rocket analogy, a rocket that's attempting to get into orbit, experiences a tremendous amount of turbulence as it's breaking out of the atmosphere, right?
Right.
So do airborne objects that are crashing. And when you're inside of them, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. Like, are we really getting ready to break out of the atmosphere? Or are we about ready to crash into the ground? So there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of discomfort. And even for people that are really good in difficult situations, it's a lot to bear over extended periods of time. So I think you necessarily have to go through a period, or we're going through a period, where there's just a lot of maintenance that's going on. Just trying to take care of people, trying to listen, trying to be really responsive to situations in proactive ways, trying to do what we can to support people, right? And get far enough along through this trajectory that we can actually end up then refocusing, regrouping, and getting back to where we started and saying, okay, now it's here where we are. This is the culture that we've wanted. How do we start proactively working on this together in a little bit less of a charged environment? But I think there has to be some accommodation made for what happens, during those periods where you push really hard.
Right. Yeah. That's super, super interesting. Well, I'm trying to cherry pick a couple questions here. One question that's maybe more of a business model question. This is from Ryan on LinkedIn. Ryan asked a question of Ryan is a musician. So just to give you the backdrop here, I'm gonna shorten his question, or just cherry pick part of his question here. But he's a musician, and he asked a question of, do you see a day where vinyl industry is capable of single or small batch print-on-demand solutions for artists that aren't submitting orders that are on the scale of a large record label or record company?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us about that. I think this is an interesting part of your business model. And in a way, you're sort of potentially disrupting the space as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the more we can reduce the size of the minimum run, the more titles we can make available, which is super important if you're a musician. We know that it's possible for us inside of what we do now that we could do runs that were significantly smaller than sort of what are the minimums required by most companies and most plants. And we're actively working, and there are others in the world that are actively on making sort of an ultra small run, 5 or 10, or even on-demand records possible. There's lots of challenges, and not only are there technical challenges, but there's business model challenges as well. But there's a lot of effort and focus going into it. And then, on the flip side, there's things that I think that can be done to take runs that are maybe in the 100 to 300 range and make them far more available to artists that don't have, label or management support, so that the stuff can get out in the world as well. And by the way, this is a key focus that we have here and inside the group, which is how we can make more and more music available on vinyl to more people.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, so I guess for organizations that are about to begin a digital transformation, what starting advice do you have? I mean, what advice would you give to someone who's just thinking about getting started on an ERP implementation, or going out and finding new technology or new ways of doing business? How do you get started? I mean, what are some of the things that you've seen work for your journey, and what are some of the mistakes you've made? I mean, what would you leave us with to get started?
Yeah, I mean, number one, we tried to make it as simple as possible, right? I mean, the promise of ERP is it's this vast system that can do all these things. We tried to just really focus on what were the basics that we needed and that we were going to bring over from our parents' implementation. And I want to be clear, we literally, from a tech standpoint, we talked about this in terms of MVP, right? Like, I challenged the team to define what the MVP was, and anything that didn't contribute to that MVP was off the table for phase one. Like, we were just going to look at it, right? And that's great because it helps us focus on knowing that what we get was going to work. It helped make the implementation a little bit easier because we didn't have so much to do, and it's plenty hard as it is, even with what we've got. And it also didn't paint us into a corner because it gave us lots of room to grow if we felt that there were needs to grow without being tied into all this stuff that we didn't really understand, right? So keep it simple, or as simple and limited as possible. The second thing I would say is we were really focused on moving very quickly. And you hear about this all the time, right? But also not being too attached. And it's hard. It's hard to invest the time and resources that are necessary. You want to get it right. You don't want to make mistakes, right? But we found that the more we could hold things lightly and just keep keep covering whatever ground we could every day to get closer and closer and get running, was really helpful. And the third thing that I would say that we did, which has been invaluable, is that we really brought in people to specifically help facilitate our implementation, even though we didn't really know what we were getting, with a sort of a dual mission, which is, number one, help us get this thing up and running, but number two, help us go through a discovery process so that we can learn what we're actually getting. And the notion was then to plant the seeds for what comes next, right? So as small and as simple as possible, brought online as quickly as possible, where we're sort of connected to it as loosely as possible, and at the same time we're trying to develop as much information as we can about what we've got, so that we can quickly make decisions about where we want to go next.
Interesting. That's sound advice. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and it sort of tying this all together. It goes well beyond just going out and finding a technology and figuring out a way to deploy it. I mean, there's a lot more to it, as you've talked about here today. So I think that's maybe the way to leave it is, let's not assume that digital transformation is dead, but let's not assume that the way we've been doing it all along is the right way or effective way either. I think we've got to sort of rethink it and look more holistically at what digital transformation is and what it means to us individually as organizations and as teams, and make sure we're looking at all those different angles.
Yeah, and I think that having you all challenge your clients to answer the question, what do they want?
Right.
And what do you want?
Yeah. What do you want to be when you grow up, and how is this going to support it?
Not what can I do for you, or what I think you should have, or, reasoning by analogy, what we've seen other clients do, but what do you want, and what's going to best serve your organization and your people, and particularly your people. That seems like a good starting point.
All right. Thank you, Drake. Appreciate you being on the show. A great conversation, very interesting and very innovative way of thinking about digital transformation. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights and the way you've chosen to rethink digital transformation there at Nashville Record Pressing. We're going to unpack that conversation a bit more, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling, and we just had Drake Coker on the show chatting about why digital transformation is dead and how we need to rethink digital transformations to be more successful in the future and to be more effective in our transformations. What were some of your takeaways and insights from that conversation, Kyler?
Yeah, well, it was a great conversation. I learned a lot, not only from the business perspective, but the, record manufacturing and distribution perspective as well. And that's one of my favorite parts about working here at Third Stage is you get a lens into how businesses work in all different industries. And it's always interesting to just, kind of have that cross-pollination between the technology, but the business unit is always so beautifully unique. And that's the one thing, that I think Nashville record pressing brings to the table, is they are unique and a very art focused and creativity focused client, which a lot of times in having a technical conversation doesn't always match. But in this one, because Drake's so focused on a healthy culture, things like a technology transition or a new system embrace that change as opposed to resist it. So I thought that was, very well put and important, that a lot of basics or basic projects miss because they go straight to the technical piece of it.
Yeah, and they're not thinking about things like culture, innovation, the people, the way we're organized, or even the operations. A lot of times organizations just sort of gloss over the operational piece and defer too much to the technology. So I think he's got a very refreshing view of how to reprioritize digital transformations.
Yeah, it's incredibly holistic and showcases the business as a unit as opposed to different segments or silos within the business that might be responsible or have that handoff to say, you handle it, CIO, and the rest of us aren't incredibly involved. I think his openness to understanding that it's a complete cultural shift and organizational design shift as opposed to just a new technical tool.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's clearly in an industry like he's in that's being disrupted and changing quite dramatically over the years. You could argue it's even more important in a company like that. But I think, most industries are being disrupted by technology, by outside forces, by strategic forces. There's just a whole host of things that are causing organizations to need to be more nimble and more agile and more flexible and responsive to the changing world around them. And so it's refreshing to hear how he's tackled that problem and opportunity.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to ask him about the intellectual property and the AI music as well, to see kind of what his take was on that overall policy shift.
Yeah, there's a lot I didn't get into. I wanted to ask him a lot more about music and the music industry in general, just because it's so fascinating to me personally. But I decided to try to keep it on track with the transformation angle. But you're right, there's a lot. We might have to have him on the show just to talk about all kinds of random music industry type stuff like AI.
Yeah, definitely. We got some great questions too from the audience, and if you would pop in the chat, because I'm really interested to hear what the answer is. What's your favorite vinyl record? And we can go into a Beatles versus Elvis debate as we, have sparked the internet on that. But I'm interested to hear from the audience of what is your favorite vinyl record.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too. I know I asked him what his favorite records were, and he sort of covered a lot of ground in his descriptions, but I was trying to think I don't know if it has to be vinyl necessarily or record. I still think of them as albums. I still buy albums or download whole albums. I usually don't just get songs, but yeah, I'd be curious to hear from the audience what your favorites are. One of my favorites is Third Stage, the album Third Stage by Boston. But it's not, it's not my top 10, but it is one of my favorites for sure. So I'd be curious to hear though what the audience thinks. I was trying to think, I've got hanging on my wall here. You can't see it because it's off on the side, but I have Hysteria by Def Leppard is framed on my picture. That's one of my favorite albums. And then, of course, Third Stage, which is also behind me. And then a band called Hold Steady, which is a current band. I like a lot of classic rock, but of all the current bands, there's a band called the Hold Steady that's my favorite band and has been for the last 20 years here in the 2000s. So those are a few of mine if anyone cares. And I'd love to hear what the audience thinks too. What's your favorite record? If you had to pick one growing up or even now, what would you pick, Kyler?
I don't know. I mean, I grew up in such rural country, so always country music was kind of what our culture was back then. And I have to be honest, I've never even held an actual record before. I've never seen one. I wouldn't know how to use a record player. So that's something that I feel like I was just thinking, if any of you are watching on our video, I was scribbling down some notes that we should get a record player for our offices and, be able to kind of bring in our favorite albums or records or teach me how to use it.
That's a great idea and a great point. I didn't even think of that. I wonder if there's Oh, there are people listening, watching right now that don't know how to use a record player that never have. If you're one of those people, drop in the chat. I'd love to know. Have you ever, well, maybe one extreme or the other. Have you never used a record player or not even know, how to use it? Or on the other extreme, do you still collect vinyl like I do? I still collect them. I have a lot of vinyl that I haven't even opened just because I like the idea of having a new, freshly pressed record that's never been played. And then I have other records that I actually just listen to because I like the sound of them. And I think I'm a purist, and I believe, as I mentioned in the interview with Drake, I think records sound way better than digital media ever. I don't want to say ever could, because someday they might match it, but they just have not matched it yet. Haven't even come close, in my opinion. So it's very convenient, though. But I'm curious to see what the audience thinks, though.
Definitely something that AI can't copy. As he said, it's an art.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, good. Well, that was a great conversation. We'll have to have him back on the show too at some point in the future. He's a great guest and very interesting perspective that he takes on, especially as a CEO. He's got a different mindset than most CEOs, for sure. So look forward to seeing how that company evolves over time. And speaking of technology and changes to technology, you had a chance to do a little test run of ChatGPT in a software selection project, or a mock software selection project. And you're going to share us that clip here in just a minute. But and I'm going to ask you a couple questions before we set up the clip. But first, why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll come back and I'll ask you the questions. We'll play the clip of you and your little experiment that you did on the selection process. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
A man decides after 70 years that what he goes there for.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
But we're never gonna survive unless we get a little crazy. No, we're never
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes of this podcast every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. Thank you for being here today. So, Kyler, you recently did a little experiment. Why don't you tell us about this experiment you did involving ChatGPT?
Yeah, well, like all organizations, our team on the marketing and content development side have been testing ChatGPT to see how it could create some efficiencies. And it's kind of interesting. Our brand, the quality and the purity of our content is part of the Third Stage DNA. So it's a very slippery slope when it comes to what are you actually talking about and creating value for our important audience and community members, like everyone that's joining us here. So what I thought I would do is actually go through a software selection with ChatGPT. And I picked a specific industry, which is healthcare. And then I asked our expert to see if ChatGPT was right. So I asked ChatGPT, what are the 5 top ERP systems in healthcare? And it spit out a list of top 5. And so I thought I would just give Greg a call and we would have a conversation about what ChatGPT said and what was actually in an expert's experience correct. So I kind of rectified that those two different conflicting pieces of information often.
Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you filmed this whole thing. So you recorded this.
We filmed it. Yeah, we did.
All right.
At first, my first approach was just to send it to him because obviously he is a very busy person. And when I sent it to him, he was like, "This is all wrong." So I said, "Well, we got to talk about it for ground control and for our content and for our community to let people know, that there's always a catch when it comes to that automation software, and it's only as clean as the data that's put into it, which can also have biases. And we see that a lot with these different AI platforms, is whoever's creating the content or creating the code, they have a human bias. So we wanted to kind of test the bias of ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And you just reminded me of an article I just read over the weekend, this last weekend. It's in Harvard Business Review, and it's a article about 3 different tiers of analytics and how the human interaction with analytics works best. You know, you have everything from like just basic business intelligence and reporting to predictive analytics to full on artificial intelligence. And it talks about different scenarios and how the human interaction needs to evolve or change depending on what kind of data you're dealing with. So it sounds like that might be an interesting article to augment this experiment that you did with Greg. But let's roll the clip of you guys doing this experiment, and we'll come back and unpack it here in just a moment. So here's Kyler and Greg running through a ChatGPT software selection process for, it was a healthcare, in the healthcare industry, correct?
Yes.
But same idea. I mean, the insert industry vertical here, you could do the same process for whatever vertical you're in, but we're going to do a little case study here involving the healthcare industry. So let's roll the clip and we'll come back to it.
So, Greg, like I said, we had done an experiment with ChatGPT and talking about that and integrating it into our tech enterprise stack, like a lot of other tech companies are going through, or companies in general. So, what we did with our experiment was we looked at the top systems, the top ERP systems in a specific industry, and we chose healthcare. And since you are an expert in healthcare technology, I want to tell you what ChatGPT said and then see if it's actually wrong or right. So kind of a fun
very
little
exciting.
experience.
So we're going to have a yes or no question and answer ChatGPT chat. I like
yes. Yes. So the systems that they outlined, so they said first about Epic. So let's start there. So
Sure.
Epic is a leading healthcare provider of healthcare software solutions, including electronic health records, EHR, and ERP systems. Epic's ERP system, called the quote financial management module, provides features such as revenue cycle management, financial
Right.
reporting, and supply chain management.
Correct. The and Epic is also a electronic medical records provider. They are not well known for their financial and supply chain ERP systems.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really just getting into that, and they are getting into CRM as well. Both of these areas are really more focused on the clinical side of the business. So
Okay.
the patient-facing side of the business. Revenue cycle, for instance, is all about patient revenue and the running of the hospital system. So where we come into play generally is on the ERP side of things. So
Mhm.
on the enterprise resource planning side, if you will, there are a few main players. So Epic and Cerner are the 2 primary providers of electronic health records. Meditech, also in kind of a lower tier, also provides that functionality. They also provide a lot more of the traditional ERP, finance, and supply chain pieces in the Meditech solution. Most healthcare providers, and when we say providers, we mean hospitals,
Mhm.
operate with a clinical system or the EHR system, Epic,
Mhm.
Cerner, Meditech, as well as an ERP system. Generally, the large top tier systems in that category are Infor, Oracle, and Workday. Traditionally, Infor really owned about 70% of the marketplace for finance, supply chain, human capital management, payroll, the traditional ERP functions. They also broaden their portfolio so that they offer a number of interoperability components.
Mhm.
Cloverleaf is what they call their interoperability solution, workforce management, and some of the edge solutions around core ERP for healthcare. Likewise, Oracle has been moving up in the marketplace very rapidly with a similar portfolio of ERP functions that interoperate and interact with Cerner, which they acquired about a year ago.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so Workday is the latest up and comer in the healthcare marketplace, making great strides in terms of even class recognition of performance of an ERP. I think they were number one in class or best in class last year. And they have been taking a lot of the market share from Infor, which was traditionally the lion's share of ERP systems in healthcare, dating back over 20 years. So those three at the very top echelon are really competing for the ERP space.
That's really interesting. And as I mentioned, kind of our GPT top 5 list, we have Cerner on there. We have Infor Healthcare on there. We also have SAP for healthcare. Is that a leading solution, or would you push back on that to recommend something else in its place?
I'd push back on that simply because SAP has made a couple of forays into the healthcare space on the ERP side and not been very successful in breaking into that marketplace. They do a lot of work with biopharma, biomedical engineering, medical manufacturing, absolutely, but not in the provider or the hospital space. They have not been a major force.
Interesting. And then when we look at specific, you had mentioned there's almost two different areas, the EHR management and the ERP side management as well. Are those two separate evaluations, or do you typically do that as one evaluation for the overall holistic organization?
Generally, that's a great question. Generally, two separate evaluations. However, in terms of the entire overarching program or the direction for a hospital, mergers, acquisitions, which happen quite commonly, affiliations with other hospitals, there are generally multiple systems that are being brought into one parent entity. When that happens, very often the decision about which EHR system to go with and which ERP system to go with really have to be connected. You really have to determine how everything is going to come together in a unified system.
That sounds like an extremely complex project. So
It
in
is.
kind
It
of
is extremely complex, and I would just tell you that generally, those two decisions, and even it can even be broken down further. So you can have a clinical decision about which direction you're going to go, although most of those decisions have been made, Epic, Cerner, or Meditech. And then the ERP decision is very often finance and supply chain and HCM as a separate kind of two categories of evaluation. Most healthcare systems are moving toward a unified system, in other words, one ERP for the entire system, but many are now working through a more of a best of breed alternative, which would include separate HCM and finance and supply chain. For instance, Workday for HCM, Infor for finance and supply chain.
Interesting. And when you look at that overall evaluation and the specific needs of this industry, this healthcare is one of those industries that we cover a lot here at Third Stage because they've gone through such an incredible technical transformation, not only on the actual application side, but on the business side, how they see patients, how they interact with customers, the importance of data warehousing, all of those different things. Can you talk about a few key trends and requirements that you've seen from our healthcare community and network when it comes to digital transformations they've experienced over the last, say, 5 years?
Absolutely. So a lot of the ERP systems that I mentioned In fact, Infor is a great example. They've moved to Cloud Suite, which is their multi-tenant cloud environment that or platform that has been developed over the last 10 years and now is completely cloud-based. The move from traditional Lawson or the older Infor applications to Cloud Suite is a major undertaking. In fact, it's really tantamount to a new implementation. And so many of that 70% of the marketplace that was Infor originally, because Infor was the first ones to come out with really specific for healthcare enterprise resource planning solutions. The move to evaluate whether we upgrade, migrate, implement the new Infor solution or move to Oracle or Workday has become a decision that most healthcare providers are having to make because it's a major undertaking, and it's probably not going to be done again for the next 20 years, right? Hopefully.
Wow.
So right now there is a real state of flux in the healthcare marketplace, in the healthcare community, because everyone's trying to decide exactly how do I get on a unified system and which direction do I go. So making that selection of the software solution that's right for a given provider is a major undertaking.
Okay, we're here walking through a ChatGPT experiment to see if we can use ChatGPT to help us through a software selection process. We're not quite done with that process yet. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation? Then you need our newly released 2023 Digital Transformation Report. This comprehensive report covers the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to ensure your digital transformation is optimized for success. The 2023 Digital Transformation Report is packed full of proven methodologies and insights from experts in the independent digital transformation field. You'll also receive practical insights on how to implement digital transformation strategies within your unique organization. This free report is available for download on our website at thirdstage-consulting.com under our Thought Leadership section.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham, and we're in the midst of playing you a clip of a ChatGPT experiment where we're trying to use ChatGPT or AI to help us select software in a mock software evaluation, a mock software selection process. So let's jump back into the conversation.
I want to dig into that undertaking just a little bit more, but before we kind of move on to that phase, you talk a lot about in your thought leadership specifically about phase zero planning and the importance of that. And because of your extensive experience in healthcare, what is kind of the level of prioritization that should be phase zero before you even go into the selection, the implementation planning, those types of different initiatives?
I think it's paramount. Many of the healthcare organizations that initially went from an older ERP system to Infor, Cloud Suite, Oracle, Cloud, Workday, initially didn't take the time and get the understanding of the organization and the readiness of that organization from both a technical, functional, and process standpoint to move to a cloud-based software system. And therefore they had mixed results on it very early on. It's absolutely critical that you take the time to understand what the objectives are for the organization, really what you want to have as an end state, as well as what is the return that we're going to have in terms of being able to improve the quality of care, improve the quality of the financial information, and information that you're receiving from disparate sources within the, let me start over again.
Okay.
It's just vitally important that a phase zero is undertaken as a preparation for the beginning of the implementation of the chosen software system. And many successful hospital organizations are doing that right now.
Well, definitely. And I think that piece is extremely critical. And I know we have a few resources on our website talking about phase zero checklists that we can link below in this conversation as well, just to
Yeah.
ensure that you are, prepped and ready for that. So, in going into the supporting partners, we talked a little bit about this HOP software. We learned that you cannot trust ChatGPT for your software evaluation. You do need that expertise. It does not know everything, folks. But also, I want to talk about the different specialized technical partners that you need in a digital transformation within a healthcare industry. Can you kind of outline that core external team that you'd be looking at when you put together your overall support network?
Yeah. I can tell you that you need someone who is independent and agnostic in terms of deciding which direction is right for your healthcare organization and moving to a new ERP or digital operations. The uh, the other thing that you need to look at is certainly data architects in terms of being able to determine exactly how things should fit together, especially how they should interoperate. Interoperation or interoperability within healthcare is critical between that clinical system that we
Mhm.
described and the ERP system. So how all of the pieces fit together needs to be done by somebody who truly understands the overarching architecture of the solution set that you're looking at. You also have to be very concerned with change for the organization. So organizational change management and expertise in that area, along with training, is something that you need to establish upfront and even before you decide on the exact ERP software solution. So selection and strategy for the organization moving into that phase zero that we discussed,
Hmm.
preparation of the organization, and then moving into implementation of the chosen solution going forward, all needs to be managed by a team of experts. And very often within hospitals, there are program management offices that are well established and can handle some of that. But really, an outside team that does this all of the time as an advisory group is really the the way to go for most healthcare organizations, and that has become a standard in the industry.
Mhm. Yeah, really that project management, PMO, oversight, governance, all of that different support structures, really that insurance policy, we call it, right, for a failed transformation. And I know you've seen failed transformations. And when we say failed, that doesn't always mean a bad thing, right? That means that the transformation is trying to move forward, but it hit some sort of block or it's become not as valuable to the overall organization as it should be. So, when that happens, how can you take a project specifically in a very complex industry like healthcare and kind of right the track? Because I know that's a lot of times when we get the call third stage is when their project is in the red or it's going towards a failure or they have experienced multiple failures. So how do you bring a project in a complex industry like healthcare back to green or back to more of a healthy overall strategic approach?
Well, Kyler, very often what happens is people that are participating in the projects that are a major undertaking for any hospital also have other priorities, right?
Hmm.
They have their day jobs. They're being pulled into things like responding to a pandemic. Um, if it's not set up right from the very beginning, again, that phase zero and preparation of the
Hmm.
organization to move forward, then very often we find that people just don't have the correct time to participate. They don't understand that the project is going to be a full-time endeavor. It may not be a choice. They're trying to deal with continuing care for patients and at the same time managing their part in a project going forward. Also, the systems integrators or the implementation team very often is not completely in sync with everything that is going on in the organization. And therefore, as they get moving along, they stall. We see projects all of the time that end up going for much longer than was expected from the very beginning, and therefore over budget over time. People lose focus on what they're needing to be doing as part of the team. One of the things that we very often get called in to repair is, I'll call it backfilling of some of the resources that it really should have been decided up front exactly how you're going to staff for the project. And to your point, a lot of the projects that turn southward, for lack of a better term, is because they weren't staffed appropriately, either on the systems integrator side or on the project team side for the hospital, or both. And that's where we go in, establish a strong PMO or program management office, bring together the right people and the backfill resources that can provide those subject matter experts, especially on the hospital side, the time that is necessary to work on the project, focus on getting it done, and get through the final stages of a successful go live. And then also beginning to plan for post go live support at the same time that you are attempting to go live is also very important. So we help with that as we're going forward.
Yeah, you took the question right out of my mouth, because I can only imagine when you are in not only a very complex organization, but also critically data important, right? We're talking about life-saving measures that these people need to have those pieces of information. So how do you reach that third stage? How do you ensure that your technology is appropriately used and leveraged by your overall employee and patient community in an organization that touches so many different entities?
Well, it really goes back to that very beginning, phase zero. If an organization hasn't gone through the preparation of determining exactly where their critical data sources are, how they can come together, how they can interoperate with the clinical systems that are in the hospital, understanding of expected mergers, acquisitions, affiliations that are coming down the pike, then it just really doesn't get to that third stage of fulfillment of the planning that is put in place and the return on investment that is expected in this new system. Automation of process and really just bringing together insightful reporting from across the entire organization in real time is something that has to be planned out from the get-go. And that's what some people fail to do. And that's where often these are considered failures. To your point, you may have functional software, you may have, functional process automation, but it doesn't all come together in one continuous pattern that needs to be set up from the very beginning.
That's very well said. Very well said. And I almost don't want to ask my final question, because that was so well packaged.
Because I go too long?
No, because that was just so well packaged. But if I were a healthcare executive or responsible for going through a digital transformation as a decision maker, what would be your number one piece of advice as an independent and technology agnostic consultant, which really, again, has no financial relationships with software, but does have a relationship with helping our clients reach strategic goals within the project? What would be your number one piece of advice?
I would say that you need to be very introspective. You need to put together the governance prior to jumping into any project of this size. So establishing the internal sponsorship for this magnitude of a project, and then embarking on, a thoughtful strategy decision about which direction you're going to go, and working with a partner like Third Stage, frankly, to make sure that that checklist for the phase zero and preparation of the organization is completely figured out before you embark on that entire journey. And I think that's the way of truly achieving that third stage.
All right, super interesting stuff. Interesting example or case study or a mock software selection. We've got a lot to unpack from that conversation, but first we're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned, though. We're going to unpack that and dive into the findings from that ChatGPT experiment here in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 123, where you can find new episodes of this digital transformation podcast every Wednesday on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. So, Kyler, this really interesting experiment you just did, or that you didn't just do it, but we just played you the clip of you and Greg Benton from our team going through the ChatGPT software selection process. What were some of your sort of your takeaways or your lessons learned from that mock software selection process?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just holistically, the thesis of that conversation was to showcase the importance of really having that expert opinion that's not only an expert in the software like our vendors are, but also implementing the software. Healthcare is obviously an incredibly complex industry, as are many industries, especially ones like healthcare that have gone through significant transformation within the last 3 years after the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw a lot of need for new technology in the healthcare field. And I always wondered, to be totally honest with you, why Greg always talked about interoperability. I remember when he first joined the team, I was like, I hope no one ever asked me to say that word on a podcast, because it took me like 3 weeks to even like practice saying the word. But now I see, because his background is in healthcare, the importance of those integration and connections through those different pieces. So that, was a main theme of this conversation. But really what I did is I typed in the top 5. I'd give ChatGPT that prompt, and a couple of them were on the list, but a couple of them, like we talked about SAP in healthcare, he said no, he would not at all recommend SAP in healthcare. Specifically, there's not even a really great solution for that. So that was on number 3 on our list. And that would be something that he truly would not ever recommend to an organization unless it was a very specific or unique instance in which that was a main consideration. And he also brought up the mergers and acquisitions piece of specifically healthcare. And we see this in other industries as well. Understanding what you're bringing together is going to be that main phase 0 planning. And ChatGPT obviously doesn't have the ability to take into account those considerations. So it was a really fun experiment and conversation, both on the healthcare side and learning more about the industry and the needs of that industry, but also on just testing, can AI functions give us those recommendations? And sometimes they do pop out, good content, but it always needs to be evaluated by, a human expert in that area in order to be correct.
Yeah, you're right. And so far, we haven't seen evidence that AI will be able to completely replace human intuition and instinct and some of those things. You can replicate fact finding and consolidation of mass amounts of data, predictable data, but it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't fill the void completely of what humans can do. And especially if you think about like organizations they're always trying to improve, they're trying to evolve, they're trying to be better than other competitors or other organizations, especially in the for-profit space. So it's hard to see anytime in the near future AI completely replacing that human need. Now, I think it is just giving us another tool set that makes us more powerful and more knowledgeable as humans. So it's not, in my opinion, I don't know that it's necessarily a purely an efficiency gain. It's definitely not. I mean, there are efficiency gains to be had from AI and OpenAI and ChatGPT, but I think the bigger play right now, anyway, at least the way the state of technology is today, is to really augment and provide better tools and better insights and visibility and knowledge than we have in the past.
Yeah, it almost reminds me, so cyclical life when, when the internet became a thing and all of a sudden everyone believed what was on the internet. And you had to go through this completely societal coaching of you can't believe everything that you read on the internet. Now that's a known behavior, right? When you Google something or you like self-diagnose yourself that you're dying from WebMD, those things
Right.
always come with an air of skepticism. And I think that's what we need to move to this tool. Is it's a great tool in creating efficiencies or templates or those types of things, but when it comes to a strategic business decision, it is not something that you want to leverage, especially something as delicate as software. Because say I was a CIO at a major healthcare organization and I asked ChatGPT those questions and got these top 5 lists and went to the vendors, and that's really kind of the dangerous thing from them, because the vendor's job is to sell you their software. So likely when you call up SAP, they're not going to be like, oh no, we're terrible at healthcare, goodbye, you should call someone else, right? So then you're in a situation where it might not be a great match because you didn't have that independent or technology agnostic opinion, because ChatGPT is not independent and not technology agnostic. It's scraping the internet for things that it finds and reorganizing that and regurgitating it. So it's definitely a consideration for sure.
Yeah. The internet is flawed. The information on the internet is flawed, and therefore ChatGPT and OpenAI, by definition, are also going to be flawed to some degree. So you're still going to have to take it all with a grain of salt for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it was a fun, it was a fun conversation. And if anyone in the audience has some other examples of ChatGPT prompts that you found to be flawed, as Eric said, we'd love to hear about kind of your experience there and see what we can collectively educate the digital community.
Yeah, and or where have you found ChatGPT to be the most helpful? Like, what are some examples of how you've used it in your day-to-day lives? One thing I think I've talked about in this episode or this podcast recently is that I've started using it recently just to name some of my YouTube videos, and it's been super helpful because it just gives me different ideas, and I end up mixing and matching some of the responses I get from it. Again, back to the point earlier about how I'm still using my brain. I'm still picking and choosing pieces of what ChatGPT is feeding to me, and I'm sort of adding my own flavor to it or whatever you want to call it. So it's not really an efficiency thing. It's just making me, I think, better at what I'm doing. So it hasn't saved me really any time, but it's made me better, in my opinion, at naming some of these videos and making it seem more appealing, in that regard. So that's just one tiny example. I'm sure there's others that the audience might have as well. So very good stuff. Well, good. Well, thank you for another great episode, Kyler. And to the audience here, thanks for your engagement and questions and participation along the way. Again, just as a reminder, you can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. So be sure to check us out there and subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on an audio podcast platform too, if you wouldn't mind just leaving us a review, We'd love to see what kind of feedback you have for us. And of course, on the video platforms as well, we'd love to see your comments and feedback on the show as well. So we're always trying to improve and make this more and more appealing to more people. So thank you for being part of the digital transformation community here globally. So I hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next week on Transformation Ground Control. Take care. All right, thank you, Drank. Whoa, should probably get his name right. Drank.
Drank.
Drank.